now request Dr. Neha Agashi ma'am to come up on the stage and begin her lecture.
Post-lunch sessions are always a challenge. So I hope I won't sing a lullaby and put you to sleep. But nevertheless, I'm here, and this is a very unique opportunity because I've been very closely associated with Neetikushal right from naming the festival to see it grow literally in this glorious new hall. When we used to be here, there were pigeons all around. It was a different story. Yeah. So, but nevertheless, I would like to thank the organizers and especially Vice Principal Apte ma'am, she's busy, and Karikar madam for inviting me here and sharing the dais with accomplished people such as Devrankar sir. And I'm very glad that Devrankar sir has actually put forth a very important point and has actually laid down the tone for the rest of the day for where foreign policy is concerned. And he has spoken mainly about China. And in this lecture, what I plan to do is talk a bit about emerging technologies, or what they're called as disruptive technologies. And I will be talking about basically how there is a certain kind of underlying current that is growing between USA and China, or what we can call as technological Cold War. And essentially what happens to be, or how does it impact India's foreign policy? Because these emerging technologies, how do they impact our national security to a certain extent? That is what I will be covering in this entire lecture. So one can really go back to technology. If you can switch on the next slide, please, Runmei. And technology has its way of having made into our lives. For instance, you're live streaming on YouTube, if I'm not wrong, okay? Internet, or when I leave here, I'll call an Uber using a GPS satellite technology. But these are everyday kind of measures that we're seeing today, but it is an outcome of military spending done during the Cold War era. So, it was these technologies that have been born out of military spending in the name of national security, the internet, the GPS, the integrated circuits, transistors, computers, ICBMs, all of them, and as a resultant effect of nuclear weapons also, you have the Cold War starting, but you also have that Cold War spending gave a boost to military technology, and which has been made accessible in today's day and age. But today it's quite reverse. You could say that emerging technologies is actually creating a kind of tension between nation states, be it the 5G technology, which I will be focusing on as a case study. And if you look at the entire case, we have, technologies have been associated with massive waves of globalization. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Brunei. Okay. So when we're talking of industrialization and globalization, technology has been at the center of it all. And if you look at the entire case, it has brought in these massive waves of globalization. And few believe, however, that this entire phase of globalization today is a big question mark right after COVID, and given the entire supply chains being hit during the COVID times. And if you look at the entire case, there has been a kind of protectionist measures that are now ushering in, and therefore most of them are now resorting to techno-nationalism. Okay, so my basic premise that I'm trying to put forth over here is that there is a rise of techno-nationalism. And this rise of techno-nationalism is basically because of newer technologies, which is bringing in, which is linking technological innovation to nations' national security, it is linked to economic prosperity and also social stability. Okay. So techno-nationalism seeks to attain a competitive advantage for its stakeholders, and it tries to really leverage these advantages, okay, for geopolitical gains. And today, when we're talking of this kind of a new technology wave emerging, you are driving the new technological Cold War. Okay, based on the premise of what my predecessor had spoken. He spoke about the paradox that you have high levels of trade, but at the same time there is an underlying current or tensions between these two major powers, USA and China. And thus my premise that there is a new technological Cold War which is brewing between the two. So before we turn to that, however, I would like to bring your attention to the fact that at a deeper level, okay, the two grand systems, mainly technology and democracy, are locked in a bitter conflict. Why do I say so? Okay, because both are products of different eras. Democracy and technology, these are both products from different eras. They run according to different rules and principles. If you look at the machinery of democracy, okay, it has been built in times of competitive nationalism, nation states, industrialization, territorial, aggression, so on and so forth. While digital technology operates in a completely deterritorialized, non-geographical, decentralized manner. And somewhere there has been a premise that has been put forth that democracy is not designed for digital technology. And if you look at, Mrunmay, can you please switch on to the next slide? Yeah, go on to the next one, please. Even the next one. Yeah. Somewhere the paradox has been beautifully put forth by John Barlow's in his 1996 Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, which sums up the tension rather well. And what Barlow has stated is that governments derive their powers from consent of the governed. And Barlow has emphasized that legal concepts are based on property, expression, identity, movement, and rather than, it is basically based on matter. And cyberspace, there is no matter. Okay, there is no matter. Look at metaverse. You can attend, you can go on virtual parties. You can attend most expensive weddings at some 3D destinations. It is changing the way. It is putting Marx completely on the other side. Okay, so he's completely discounting the material. And the future of technology is this virtual environment, augmented reality that we're speaking of. And it is this, in this entire parlance, that you have the entire case that how do we make sense of this entire dissonance between democracy and technology? And what really has happened since 2019 has been a change where China's rise as it calls itself as a consultative socialist democracy. The world knows that it is hardly one. Democracy, the word does not go with China per se. And this rise of authoritarian state, along with the kind of rise in its technological prowess, has given an alternative model to the world. In an era where only USA dominated, okay, now you have a probable alternative. And it is this alternative which has created a problem for the superpower USA. And from 2019, therefore, you can see that USA is uneasy about the entire, essentially it begins over tariffs, then it goes on towards intellectual property theft, later technological based war over domination of Chinese based Huawei company, which I will be talking of in detail, okay, and in 5G, computer technology. So if you look at the entire journey from the change of the at the start of 21st century, okay, they were talking of the era of Chimerica, China plus America, and down to being, accusing each other. Can you go on to the next slide, please? You're talking, and when you have the maestro, Henry Kissinger, stating that we are at the foothills of a new Cold War beginning, you pay attention, because this is what is happening in the world today. So if we look at the entire from Chimerica, how has this changed to a new Cold War or new technological Cold War, if you may, at that? And that is what I'm going to explain. So if you look at the entire China's technological rise has actually been perceived as a national threat to USA and its security. And the erstwhile President Donald Trump, and during his term, his focus was on containing China's technological development, which became a top priority. And few scholars have referred to this. I mean, if you look at the actions banning Huawei or ZTE from using or producing semiconductor chips, which has resulted in disrupting supply chains at that point of time. So there has been conscious kind of technological decoupling that has taken place. Breakup. In simple words, breakup between America and between America and China. So if you look at the decoupling that's taken place, it definitely impacts even other actors such as India and Europe. So why such a Cold War? And is it merely technology or does it go beyond that? That is the main question that we need to ask. So, if you look at the entire case, I'm going to start off with the study of 5G, okay, technology. And you're going to use it as a case study of sorts. And what is 5G? Okay, I'm just going to take a slight technological detour so that to make you understand why are we talking about 5G? What is the big deal about it? 5G is a semiconductor technology, 5th generation mobile communication, and it has a revolutionary potential, okay, which will it says that it's going to be 20 times faster than 4G, which is fine with a technological upgrade. What else? 5G networks, they form the underlying infrastructure for everything, right from financial networks to telecommunication to transportation to key government services such as defense, intelligence, and it has a revolutionary military potential. Okay, it gives the ability to eavesdrop, okay, in people-to-people communication and links them to a vast and sophisticated artificial intelligence. This technology is supposed to be at par with the changes that world has seen since the advent of electricity, and that's why it is referred to as disruptive technology. Any technology, okay, which has this revolutionary potential to change the way in which world is, that is called disruptive, and 5G is disruptive in that sense of the term. So naturally, okay, whoever builds a nation state's 5G network, okay, gains access to the country's most sensitive personal, commercial, and governmental data. And that's why they say data is the new oil. Yeah. So if you look, and who has an upper hand where this 5G network is concerned? It has been Huawei. Huawei is a Chinese company. So Huawei has been a leader in providing these services across the world. Okay, and if you look at the entire case, then it starts making sense that why did USA ban Huawei? Why did it take such a tough stand? Because obviously eavesdropping, the Internet of Things, your Alexa, things that we do casually. Have you ever seen the sophisticated algorithms that are prevalent on your social media? At times you're just talking, oh, I just wish I want to buy a bag. And suddenly on your social media feeds, you will find bags. How is it taking place? It is eavesdropping. It is this entire new age that we have to grapple with. And when we're talking of this, now imagine this multifold and imagine this where security implications are concerned. So when we are talking of this entire case, it was obvious that USA had to take steps. And what it did was that it took a tough stand against Huawei and banned its operation in USA, citing security risks along with unfair trading practices. So what were the, why would you call it unfair trading practices? Because Huawei had a questionable past. Questionable past, why? Because it was involved in intellectual property theft. and it was stealing intellectual property from the companies such as Cisco, Motorola, Fujitsu, Nortel. Nortel went bust and it claimed it as its own. And that's how it grew. So if you look at the entire case, USA also raised an alarm because because of military link of Huawei in China. It is believed that Huawei supplies services to the cyber warfare unit of People's Liberation Army in China. Okay, I have more. Wait. The Chinese National Intelligence Law, okay, over the Chinese intelligence law states that companies in China have to assist government in national intelligence efforts. So it is stating the obvious that if 5G network security gets compromised and if primary control resides in a foreign entity, okay, there will be ramifications on national security because data localization, there is no law as yet. So what happens? Whoever is the service provider can easily take it offshores. So what's happening? Security is vulnerable. So when we are talking of this entire case, both USA and China are now engaged in a tussle that how do you gain maximum kind of share where 5G is concerned. And there has been a shift where, earlier where USA used to make alliances on the basis of ideology and liberalism being the underlying principle, today it is clean technology that Trump was promoting. And today when we're talking, and he's highlighted when he was in power, he has highlighted the importance of clean and open technology. And the Clean Network Program, which was promoted by USA at that point of time, is a global alliance which seeks to guard citizens' privacy and the company from any such kind of aggressive maneuvers from state actors. So over 30 countries and many telecom companies, including Apna Jio, is part of this network. And if you look at the entire case, so obviously there were questions that is it really that, is it that intrusive? Is our security, is our data that important? But if you look at the entire case, it is the possibility of China, okay, and it is promoting a different kind of a model. See, please understand that China, okay, when we are talking of China, even if we have accepted that democracy is far superior model compared to other political systems, Chinese model is very pragmatic and it is not a textbook case of communism. Okay, it has blended elements of Chinese traditions to give it a pragmatic stand. It has offered speedy development with less number of rights to citizens, but a society which believes in surveillance. Okay, it uses advanced surveillance technology such as face recognition, artificial intelligence, social credit score that have the makings. Literally, it has the makings of a highly technological totalitarian state. And if you look at the way in which it has built on its internet, okay, it is built on the state-run network operators, which are referred to often as Great Firewall of China. Okay, and control of internet by state has allowed China to control public opinion or censor information available to its citizens. And based on its own research engine Baidu, which is used by 700 million people, there are 4.9 billion people using internet. Out of that, 700 belong to China. India, 660 million. Okay, so if you look at the entire numbers, bewildering numbers, and by controlling internet, by controlling public opinion, there is an emergence of what I'm calling as anti-democratic technology, which is dividing it with the rest of the world. And China, with its access or influence in United Nations or International Telecommunications Union, for instance, is now aggressively pushing the norms for advanced surveillance technology and providing an alternative. So China, what it is doing is providing an alternative model not only if you look at not only to democracy, but also that of technology. And if you look at the entire case, post World War II, you said that the Iron Curtain has descended between the communist states and the democratic states. It can now be said that it can be replaced by a digital curtain, which is dividing the world into digitally open and digitally opaque societies. So today it's not just 5G or 6G, which China is actually developing. 2 days ago, you have USA, which has been considering banning American suppliers from selling advanced equipment to Chinese chip makers in a bid to hinder China's technological self-sufficiency. USA, even today, holds a dominant position where technology is concerned. But when you're talking, but the fact of the matter is that China is fast catching up, okay? And its success in emerging disruptive technologies is actually posing a challenge to USA's leadership and hence you have techno-nationalism. And in 2017, the national security strategy of USA declared great power rivalry with China as a foremost threat. So when we're talking of techno-nationalism, enough of China and USA and the entire backdrop and the horrifying consequences that it has, but come down to India and it makes you wonder, have we ever been techno-national, or is techno-nationalism really our forte? With respect to India, it can be said that it is a forced outcome. Rather than a choice, it was a forced outcome. If you look at India today, it is a very sound emerging technological power. Okay, India ranks third amongst most attractive destination for technological transactions in the world. It has a strong focus on science and technology, one of the topmost countries in the world in the field of scientific research, top 5 in the field for space exploration. It ranks 46 among 132 economies where Global Innovation Index is concerned, and the only South Asian country to be in this index. And this phase of glory, however, has been hard won, because it has had a long history of technology denial regime from the Western powers. Okay, and it started with the nuclear apartheid, okay, which was systematically because we were a de facto nuclear power, and we decided not to sign the NPT or the CTBT, which resulted in a slew of institutional nuclear apartheid mechanisms such as the Wassenaar Agreement, okay, which was until 2017, Australia Group, the Missile Control Technology regime, okay, all three have accepted India as a part, except for the Nuclear Suppliers Group because of China. So if you look at the entire case, this institutionalized apartheid, okay, or separateness that India has had to face, we were forced to rely on ourselves. We were forced to, including space technology. USA denied cryogenic technology to us in 1990s. So the only way that we knew was that of self-reliance. There was no other way out. So techno-nationalism became a priority where science was to contribute to economic development, but essentially by being self-reliant and going alone, where we succeeded marvelously at that. So if it has been the advances in nuclear sector or the space sector, it was really shaped by technological denial. So our advances in the nuclear sector, space sector, or the Chandrayaan, Mangalyaan, or the GSAT-19, and now this human space mission, which is about to take off in June 2022, a month down the line. Okay, all these could be marked as an epitome of self-reliance, and it is with emerging technologies which is where it becomes questionable, or because it is a swift replacer where globalization trends are concerned, and many nation states are trying to acquire, secure, gain access to supply chains. And this resultant effect is that it is pushing states into competitive techno-nationalism process, and it impacts strategic relations. So why shouldn't India be affected equally? So when we are talking of this entire case, for instance, I'll give you certain instances which have happened in the past, and this is particular to do with the cyber security as well. Or if you look at the entire case of why cyber warfare has been one of the major instances, for instance. When we're talking of the kind of newer disruptive or newer emerging technologies that are posing a major challenge in terms of regulation, you have had a lot of controversy given the backdrop of new technological war and security and national interest being stake. And today we are coming up with issues of data localization, data sovereignty, privacy concerns, national security concerns, and institutionally speaking, what have we done about it? What are the institutions that we have brought forth? So over here we have the Ministry of External Affairs, which has established a new emerging and strategic technologies division, okay, NEST, New Emerging and Strategic Technologies Division, which is referred to as NEST in 2020, which is meant to engage in technological diplomacy, especially in the fields of 5G, artificial intelligence, among others. And if you look at the other aspects, you also have the emerging technology initiative, which is one of the ways in which the government is trying to grapple with new age technologies that have a transformational impact and redefine concerns of privacy, ethics, which I will come to a bit later. And if you look at the entire case, it is to develop a feasible roadmap down the line. So ETI, or Emerging Technologies Initiative, is one such drive which has recently come about by the government. Now, one of the other aspects happens to be that with our heavy internet dependence, I think all of us have borne the brunt of internet online classes, so boring, I tell you. But if you look at the entire case, but it made education accessible. But this being online itself, okay, and the number of internet users increasing in India. If you look at the entire case, one of the important words in our lexicon where dealing with emerging technologies has been cyber warfare and cyber deterrence. What are we doing about it? Because if you look at the entire case, the government data has revealed that there has been really 1.16 million cybersecurity cases alone in 2020, where personal information of many people has been compromised, including your Domino's Pizza to cat. These are the entire cases, and million credit card records being put online. Okay, and even if India had released a cybersecurity policy in 2013, limited impact, there has been a limited impact on the entire case. What does not help is the way in which China, okay, uses its warfare, for instance, and how India has had to grapple with this. Now, for instance, if you take a look at the entire case, the cover-up regarding the coronavirus, I think Sir also spoke about the same, and how this has been used against India. So any country that dared to question China internationally or pressed China into asking certain questions regarding the origins of the virus had to face a backlash. Who did this? India, EU, Australia, Japan. Okay, they backed a resolution and all these countries have been met with Chinese hackers or cyber attacks. Prashna pucha, malware choda. Okay, that was the paradigm which China adopted. Because if you look at the entire case, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be more formal and all that, but if you look at the entire case, it suggests that China is adopting a hybrid warfare. If you don't believe me, ऐसा हुआ है क्या सच में? Let me tell you the statistics. Post Galwan Valley attack, there has been a massive surge in cyber attacks against Indian government servers, nearly 300%. Okay, there were nearly 40,000 attacks, cyber attacks on banking, IT sector since June 2020, and it was intended with stealing sensitive information and data pertaining to intellectual property and customer information. And all this was done by whom? Our army of state-sponsored hackers having a geopolitical agenda, China. read China. Okay, in red, that too. Okay, and it is of little surprise that why USA has stated in 2017 that there is a great power rivalry with China as a foremost threat. Not that China, the USA is doodh ka dhula and it has not used. It has equally used a cyber malware to crack down the entire USA and Israel. Strutniks, if I'm not wrong. It has used this malware to shut down Iranian nuclear operations. So each one of them are doing it. But nevertheless, it's like what is also dangerous is the way in which China's adoption of hybrid warfare, it is trying to entrench authoritarian values in international institutions. Who dares to question China will have a non-linear impact through cyber attacks. And this becomes problematic. Okay, so if you look at this entire order, it is necessary that we speak about data protection, because how will our data, we are increasingly online, GPay, Paytm, these are the most easy ways of settling accounts, and it is more safer than given the currency even, okay, given the coronavirus and our entire phobias. But if you look at the entire case, I would like to now turn towards our own Indian, legislations and what we are doing about it to protect that. So with respect to data protection, which is a look into Indian privacy laws is necessary. So prior to 2017, Supreme Court's views on right to privacy were rather ambivalent. There wasn't a particular right to privacy per se. In MP Sharma versus Union of India 1954 held that there is no such thing as right to privacy enshrined in the Constitution of India. Subsequent judgments followed the same. It was all this changed in the Puttaswamy judgment, which is basically the Aadhaar card judgment in 2017, declaring privacy as a fundamental right. So you may say that, decriminalizing homosexuality, eating beef, all these have, but also right to data privacy is an offshoot of right to privacy. So when this becomes a landmark case in that entire order. So when we're talking of this decision that privacy as an independent enforceable right should be recognized, and it's not just those linked with constitutionally guaranteed freedoms, what one needs to be done is that there was a particular commission, you have the B.N. Shri Krishna Committee report, which actually stated that, and which came up with a draft bill on data protection, which was submitted in 2019 in the Indian Parliament, which is currently still being debated in the Parliament, and it is talking about data protection. It is talking to define the data principle, data fiduciary, meaning who will tackle your data, retention of this data, creating a data protection authority even, and data localization for personal sensitive information. So Europe has taken a lead in this entire manner. In 2016, the GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, in keeping with its characteristic impossible trait of being the toughest buster, where when it comes to citizens' rights, or or the toughest privacy and security law in the world, it imposes obligations on organizations anywhere where so long as they collect data relating to people in EU. So only EU has managed, in fact it has only convinced Google to uphold the right to be forgotten, okay, but this happens only in Europe, nowhere else, because that is the entire, it is in keeping, I think I've given you a lecture on Europe, so I won't really go into the details, and you know the history of how it has. So keeping in mind this entire vision, okay, this is where we are heading towards, and this is where internationally we will be. USA, when we talk about USA and data privacy, there are a range of laws, and more so it has given complete freedom to social media or to others, other companies to keep operating. So as such, it is a mix, hundreds of laws that are enacted at a federal level and a level of the entire. And in fact, it is rather interesting that China has passed a personal information protection law in 2021, and which is on lines of GDPR, which is supposed to be a tough cartel buster. God knows what they are going to protect further. But this happens to be the entire. Internationally, when you're talking, there was something called as the Osaka Tract, which was brought about by G20. But India has vehemently opposed this, because India has refused to sign any kind of rules that are made in such kind of organizations, because it wants it to be done under WTO and not under G20, because ultimately if you're shaping of rules, everyone needs to have a say, and it is opposed to all forms of data colonialism, and where companies could extract data to consolidate their position market-wise. So it is this entire context in which we look at privacy issues or privacy laws. Moving on to semiconductors, okay, one of the major areas where politics has taken place. Now, what are semiconductors? They are brains of everyday products in every electronic item that we use, and these are in short supply. Partially because of the pandemic, they are in short supply. The supply chains are disrupted, and today they are indispensable assets in the race for attaining technological supremacy. So both China and USA are in a race for attaining supremacy in this entire market, and a chip of 5 nanometers is unraveling political relationships between USA, China, Taiwan, and South Korea. Okay, this small. And it is, globalization compelled this reliance, but today you have USA and China dependent on Taiwan for semiconductor supply chain, and Taiwan's independence and China's vows to unify the island with its mainland would essentially mean that USA's supply of products being impacted. USA, India, China have all initiated self-reliance in semiconductor production, and if you look at it, it is further hit because of the Ukraine and Russia war, where, because of the semiconductor production, as both countries supply neon and palladium, which is the raw materials required. Okay, so keeping in mind with the falling supply and the vision of Atmanirbharta, Prime Minister Modi initiated its very own, we have initiated our very own semiconductor mission, which is called as Semicon India program, which aims at developing semiconductors ecosystem and becoming a global hub for electronics manufacturing and design. Problem is that by then everyone will be self-reliant. But we have an internal demand. We have the population. That is the entire case. So that's how we will sustain no matter how much. One of the gray areas, okay, which is very, very exciting, which is cryptocurrency, okay, NFTs, non-fungible tokens. It is one of the entire, it came as a relief that Nirmala Sitharaman in her speech in 2022 actually announced that 30% tax on income generated from crypto transactions, which means at least they are not banning it. At least there will be a policy. Okay, because everything was in grey. No one was sure what was going to happen. And currently, there is neither a ban on use of cryptocurrencies nor a regulation to govern their use, which means there is no audit, because how would you audit? And cryptocurrencies allow you to send money anywhere in the world, anytime, and it is instant. If you try sending money from one country to another, you will have host of forms to fill in, host of forms, and your PAN card, your Aadhaar card, everything. It's like you're committing a crime. But look at the beauty of these cryptocurrencies. But look at from the angle of security. Imagine what if this is a front for money laundering. Then you see and you read in papers that non-fungible tokens, and they're creating digital rock designs and so on and so forth, which are getting sold for $1 million, which is insane, but it may be a front for money laundering, and that cannot be denied. So somewhere cryptocurrency, data privatization are gray areas which point to the fact that there is a breakneck speed of technological advancement, digital advancement. We are moving toward industry 5.0, not even 4.0. We have barely made regulations on 4.0, and we are turning towards 5.0 industry. You're talking of artificial intelligence, you're talking about the nature of changing jobs, you're talking about a completely different world. And there is a pressure on the regulators to carry out supervision in order to deal with the negative impact. And at the core of it is financial stability. Will these technologies impact, finances of a common man? Because jobs, when you're talking, or when I'm actually operating, or when I'm using GPay, is my data getting shared elsewhere? These are the security concerns. And even if you look at the entire case, because there is no trail that is left behind, or because there is no auditing in this particular field, if people invest in such kind of emerging technologies and they lose money, it is the governments who will get blamed for not doing enough. So India, is just really just about waking up to these kind of new emerging technologies. Of course, last slide, please. Just go on to the last slide, which is the second last one. Yeah. Next one. So just before this. So I'm going to end on a quote from Lewis Carroll from Alice in Wonderland. I did not want to go the negative way of Aldous Huxley, who has written The Brave New World in a dystopian manner and saying that there is, because technology has beautiful features which has the capacity to change the way in which we live. And even though it is bewildering, the breakneck speed at which things are proceeding, there is a hope that when Alice could actually face her fears, the governments only need to face their fears and just bravely come ahead with the help of technocrats and make sense of the changing technology. Thank you.
If anyone has any questions, no? Okay. Now I would like to call upon Mr. Akshay Randri to begin his lecture.
Hello. Good afternoon. Dr. Agashe said that this is tough to have a session post-lunch. I'll just add to it, it is tough to have a session post-lunch and then to be a last speaker. Because I understand the level of discourse that has already been said earlier by Professor Devrankar, now by Professor Agashe. And I can't get away by being the youngest member of them, so I'll have to sort of at least try to match somewhere there. So with that sort of disclaimer, I want to first at the outset thank the organizers of Neetikushal, Apte ma'am, Kaikan ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. We all know the eminence of the institution, the eminence of this hall even, and the history it beholds. So I think I'm fortunate and privileged to be here and to be able to speak my thoughts on a very interesting topic. And the topic that have been given to me is evolving contours of Indian foreign policy. In fact, this is what I decided to speak on. So I'll first briefly talk about why this topic and what do I mean by this topic. Interestingly, in past few years, I think there's a lot of curiosity about foreign policy. I mean, I'm a student of international relations, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've not seen literature, scholarly articles, books been written about foreign policy as frequently as that's happening now. I mean, you can just go and see how many books have been written just about Modi's foreign policy and then compare with, let's say, Manmohan Singh's or Vajpayee's or anyone before that. It's a good thing for academicians like us that we'll have more students for IR, but there is a more important subtext to it. Foreign policy is reaching our doorsteps. Foreign policy is actually making us more curious because it is now impacting our lives in more ways than we imagine. And that's why foreign policy, it is by conventional called as foreign policy, but it's as domestic as anything else. We just had a discussion on technology, and you know how there is no boundaries to that. We had your Russia and Ukraine discussion in the morning, and you already sort of appreciate what kind of interference it does into our personal life. So foreign policy is no more just foreign. But I'm going to take a slightly conventional position today. I'm going to look at foreign policy as a conventional student of IR, and I'm going to sort of present you a rear view mirror in terms of how India's foreign policy has sort of shaped up, and I'm going to primarily look at ideational variables. Now, foreign policy conventionally is a discipline of IR which ties together various variables. I mean, if you have to analyze foreign policy, you have to look at variety of variables, starting from, let's say, a foreign policy is essentially an inquiry into how country conceives of its origins. For instance, whenever we talk about Indian foreign policy, we talk about civilizational state, the ethos, strategic culture that India carried, and also the experiences in recent and in more medieval history. Those experiences inform our foreign policy decisions. In fact, colonialism, for instance, informed our foreign policy decision just after independence, not so much now, but that remained a major impact, and these experiences impact foreign policy making of any country. So that is one of the major variables. Along with that, the power composition of an individual country. What is the relative power of that state in region, at the global level, and what that power combination affords that state in terms of avenues and constraint to develop the foreign policy. That is another variable. The structural variable, structure in terms of what kind of international system is. When India became a republic and was crafting its foreign policy, we all know it was a bipolar structure, and we sort of adjusted our foreign policy on those lines. Then we had a unipolar world. Today, we are slightly confused. What is the international order today? There's a conventional wisdom suggests that this is now a multipolar world moving towards a new Cold War. We talked about technological Cold War just now. But that is one conventional wisdom. Then there is other who say, no, this is just too far-fetched. We still do not know if that's really a new Cold War emerging. These are all speculation. Regionally, we are confused. We don't know if this is a multipolar Asia or a unipolar Asia or a multipolar Asia dominated by China. The emerging powers are giving a different picture altogether. So slightly we are confused, and therefore foreign policy sort of responds to these structural issues also. And therefore, as a foreign policy analysis, as a student of foreign policy, it is an intricate exercise, but at the same time, it is also very intriguing, especially for a country like India, where it presents a very diverse political landscape, and it's not just diverse, it is equally polarized. I mean, we just have to look at political debates to see what kind of polarization it exists. But despite that, it is an intriguing exercise. So foreign policy, therefore, is a very niche in the broader IR discipline, and it is generally not appreciated, but it requires tying together a lot of variables to make sense of how state is responding in any particular situation. But why evolving? Now, my topic is evolving contours of foreign policy. Why evolving? I mean, there was Nehru's foreign policy, and then there was Gandhi's, and then there was subsequent prime minister. By the way, I hope all of you notice that foreign policies are never sort of identified with the foreign ministers. It is always identified with the leaders, the political executives. And that's an anomaly why, and it's not just with India, it's across the space. Foreign policies are never identified with foreign ministers. Poor fellows. But what we have is that there is certain evolution that happens. These are not separate foreign policies. And one thing about foreign policy is that foreign policies always reflect a sense of continuity. I mean, again, this is true for multi-party democracies across the globe. Whether you go to United States, a Democrat will have a certain foreign policy implications. Republican will come, there will be certain nuances, certain specifications, but that change of governments do not necessarily mean that foreign policy would be changed fundamentally. There will be certain nuances, there will be certain issues that governments will bring in, but that do not mean that foreign policies change. Similarly, it is true for India. In fact, more so, despite the fact that we have such a diverse political landscape, foreign policies do not change. I mean, whether it is a Congress government or a BJP government or any coalitions, the framework broadly remains the same, but then there are certain additions, and that's how foreign policies evolve. There has never been a revolution in foreign policy. Thankfully, India, we are not much in favor of any kind of revolutions, and that doesn't happen even in foreign policies. Foreign policies always evolve. But why do they evolve? This is where the analysis of foreign policies come in. There are various factors people attribute to why foreign policies evolve. I'm going to focus on two ideational factors, something which is very fundamental to analyzing foreign policy. The first is how leaders perceive the significance of power in international relations. The moment you enter the discipline of IR, the first thing that is thrown to you is what is power and what is its significance. It may seem very fundamental, but when you start analyzing foreign policies, you will see that it is not as implicit, it is not as apparent. Understanding the significance of power and what kind of power you want to be decides what kind of policies you are going to make. It boils down to this very fundamental question. No matter what other school of thoughts will tell you, this is going to be central as long as there are going to be at least two states. Because whenever you want to interact with another state, the element of influence will come in, and that influence brings from the power. So the first variable I'm going to look at is what kind of power, or how significant was power to certain prime ministers, and the allied question is what kind of power they thought India was. Where did they think India was? What was according to them, what was the place of India? How did they contextualize, situate India in a peculiar context? These two variables will give us an understanding how our foreign policy has evolved over years. And I'm going to begin with, obviously, with Nehru. And when you're understanding foreign policy, it's impossible that you will not start with Nehru. That is something where we begin. Now, a lot of people tend to sort of believe that Nehru was an idealist. We are always told that Nehru was an idealist in foreign policy. I don't want to deny that, but I want to contend that. He was not a doctrinaire idealist. Much like he was not a doctrinaire socialist. I mean, he was not, though socialism was a very inspiring idea, but he was not a doctrinaire socialist. He was sure what socialism was going to do to democracy, and therefore he was never a doctrinaire socialist. Similarly, he was not a doctrinaire idealist too. There was an element of pragmatism. But having said that, I think the first answer to the question, the first variable, what was the significance of power in Nehru's strategic calculus? This is what I want to submit for your consideration. I think Nehru thought that power was not indispensable in IR. And when I'm saying power in a critical Machiavellian sense, the hard power that we say. He believed that hard power is not indispensable. You can move around without having that. And what was the reflection of it? The first reflection of it was the belief, the faith he had in an institution like United Nations. He thought that United Nations was going to play a major role in post-war situation. I mean, in the morning session, Nevankar lamented that UN did not do much during the COVID times. I want to go a bit back in history. When has UN done much in history for anything? But we had fundamental faith that UN was going to do something to the world. It is going to change the world fundamentally. That is where, and that faith, now was this just based on Nehru's brute idealism? No. Nehru was conscious of the fact that a developing economy would require resources, and if we have institutions like UN which can help us mitigate conflict, so be it. We are not going to invest our resources on military hardware. So he thought that power was not indispensable. And therefore he believed in United Nations. Of course, I'm giving UN as one of the examples for the paucity of time, but you can cite examples where you can see, okay, power was not going to be indispensable. But we were up for a major disillusionment. Right in 1948, when the entire issue, the Kashmir issue, went to United Nations, we were facing a first major disillusionment. Now we can debate whether Nehru decided to go to UN or he was coerced into doing it. That debate I don't want to get into, but the fact was that he believed that UN is going to make a reasoned judgment. We failed. I mean, in the history of the world, it was for the first time when a winning military power took a conflict to United Nations. I mean, it's okay for a losing power to do it, but we were winning the Kashmir war, but we took it to United Nations, and that was something which, and there was calculus behind it. Nehru wanted to show that we have trust in United Nations. United Nations is going to be very important, but that is where our first disillusionment was. And by the way, we did not stop there. We were invested in United Nations even before it was born, so we were heavily invested diplomatically. But eventually, after that, we were in Suez crisis, we were in Korean conflict. Everywhere we thought that United Nations was going to help us, which shows that power was, according to Nehru, was not indispensable. There are avenues where you can move around it. But based on it, if this was his understanding of power, his understanding of what kind of power India was equally sort of flowing from this, and he believed that India was a moral power, that India was destined to do something great. It had a rich history, it has rich heritage. All these worlds were squabbling in Europe are very recent. We have a civilization for long. So we are destined to sort of lead the world. And from there flew the noble idea of non-alignment. Now, again, non-alignment had a very pragmatic considerations to it, but non-alignment precisely was born out of a need for a third way in a world fraught with power rivalries. Non-alignment was India's way to tell people that, okay, don't get boggled in by this power rivalries, we have a third way and India is going to lead that. And it wasn't the only implication. The other implication was that Nehru wanted to bring about Asian solidarity. And he thought that, okay, China was going to be our, China was going to be our friend in which the Asian solidarity would come in. Firstly, the Asian solidarity was, by beginning, was on a problematic premise, because remember, Asia was a continent where countries were just independent. They were just decolonized countries, and it was by nature they would be nationalist. The nationalistic sentiments in newly decolonized countries was going to be very strong, and therefore to expect these newly decolonized countries to sort of forget their national identity and row around some Asian identity was itself a problematic premise. But beyond that, we also thought that China and India together are going to bring about this Asian solidarity, the much romanticized third way. But while we were thinking that we are giving a moral alternative, the others thought that we were an expansionist power. China thought that India was an expansionist power. The entire 1962 war was triggered by this feeling that India was an expansionist power, so we misread that. So while we misread the power, what kind of power we wanted, we also overemphasized our own moral capabilities, and there was a small subtext to it that we wanted to exert influence without power. So we thought that we can be influential without having power. We were hailed a lot. We were seen as a neutral country for at least some point in time. We were seen as some a third world leader. But what material benefits did it? When the actual conflict became a reality, all these things were inconsequential. So this was the edifice on which the foreign policy was started, but it made its first major inflection point with Mrs. Gandhi. And how did Mrs. Gandhi look at power? And what was her conceptualization of what kind of power India is? And in fact, Indira Gandhi herself said that she is not like her father. In fact, it is believed that she said that she believed that Nehru was a saint who was somehow got into politics. She had no qualms with regards to power. In fact, she knew hard power was indispensable. In fact, she knew how to use power very well. She knew how to use power for political benefits. In fact, it had unintended consequences in regions like Mizoram. We don't want to talk about it, but that was an indication that she did not have any problems by using power. And that translated into international politics. She had nothing to do with moralism. She realized that this is empty symbolism, has absolutely no place in international politics. And the first indication of this was we stopped giving sermons about non-alignment, and we stopped giving sermons about third world. We stopped giving importance to United Nations also. If you look at the amount of resources Indira Gandhi devoted to UN peacekeeping and all those trivial activities, you will see that they were substantially cut down. It is from Mrs. Gandhi's time that we started using international organizations for our benefit and not for anybody else's. Before that, UN was this to show how great India was. After that, the element of transactionalism in international relations, we understood through Mrs. Gandhi. That IR is transactional, it is nothing beyond that. Don't try to sermon, it's not going to work. And that's how we stopped giving any significance to United Nations. But then there was another important aspect which Mrs. Gandhi brought in, and this is when which sort of changed the tracks for Indian foreign policy henceforth. From moral power, Mrs. Gandhi made India what I would say that a balancing power. This is a very important innovation that she brought in, and she realized that. Gaining power, of course, India did not have resources even during Mrs. Gandhi's time. So building up hard power was not an easy thing. But she realized a very Kautilyan sense. If you read Kautilya in the equation of power in Kautilya, he talks about ally being a component of national power. And she realized in short term, you can have power by having strong strategic partnerships. And that came through the Friendship Treaty, the Soviet Friendship Treaty. Now we call it Friendship Treaty. You just read the text of it and tell me if it's anything else but an alliance. It is an alliance just short of calling it. But it talks about placating the threat, probable threat, going to help the country and everything that a conventional alliance is. But we say no, this is a Friendship Treaty. And on top of it, the funny thing was, if you read the first article of that text, it says that the Soviet Union respects the policy of non-alignment and thinks that it is the important aspect in maintenance of international peace and security. Now, who is saying this? One of the pole of the bipolar. The Soviet Union was one of the poles, and the other country was India, which was giving a death knell to that entire non-alignment through this Friendship Treaty. But this is the element of continuity. We do not give away our vestiges. We want to we are happy with evolving rather than completely discarding. We kept that non-alignment. We used non-alignment in letter, if not in spirit, but that was there. And this is again interesting. This treaty was signed in 1971. 2 years before that, General Secretary Brezhnev had come up with a proposal of collective security in Asia. Soviet was anxious what was happening, the evolving equation between Pakistan, China and US. India did not sign that. India was not keen on being part of it, but in matter of 2 years, we enter an alliance. What does this show? That India was more moving towards bilateralism, it was not interested in multilateralism, and it realized that diplomacy is transactional. We will give something to, and remember, while we entered into that Friendship Treaty, Soviet Union was more than happy to get into it. It wanted a key player in South Asia which could tackle the expansion of US in the region, and India was happy to be part of it. So this is what made India a balancing power. India, from a moral power, India during Mrs. Gandhi's time became a balancing power, which was an innovation of sorts, because now we were not really talking about morals, now we were talking about hard power. She also, by the way, realized one thing, that you cannot have influence without power, and that power has to have a material angle to it. So we were not just talking about third world leadership. We started talking about, so there was a peaceful nuclear explosion. We did not turn it into a nuclear bomb, but we showed that we have a capability. We there was a wrath of international, we talked about nuclear appetite, which starts from there. But we did nonetheless. We were not just talking about building goodwill and all that. We sent a naval expedition to Antarctica. This is when we became part of Antarctic Council. We started doing deep sea mining. We were into developing the UN laws on seas. So we were saying, okay, we will develop our international repute, but it will not be on ideational normative things. It will be based on material realities. And this is what she did. This is what was the first major inflection point, and that's why our foreign policy evolves from being a moral power to becoming a balancing power. We were still a balancing power. We were not a power that would be on its own rights, for obvious reasons, but we were a balancing power. We were a power which were important, at least in South Asia, and which was no less. The next inflection point and next evolution comes with Vajpayee. Of course, I'm you might thinking I'm missing out on a very important tenure of Narasimha Rao. But I'll just briefly mention about Rao. Of course, there were various initiatives happened during Narasimha Rao's tenure also. but these were something, just now ma'am said that, the technology, we were forced to do it. I believe most of the reforms that happens in India, unless we are forced to do it, unless we are pushed to the wall, we do not want to climb it. This is something which is a reality. 1991 was the same thing. There was a decades-long mismanagement of economy that resulted into severe crisis. But that's why we opened up the economy. But at the international level, there was a major structural change that happened with the disintegration of Soviet. And for 25 years or more than that, the country which was the keystone principle of India's security policy overnight just crumbled. So we had to reorient our foreign policy. Of course, the thing started with Rajiv Gandhi. I mean, it's not Narasimha Rao started it. But in major things initiated with this, even that was the time when people started talking about that Indian policy is going from rational to national, there is more nationalistic, we are opening up to Israel, what is happening to secularism, so on and so forth. But that apartment, those political debates will continue. But in the process of sort of responding to crisis, Narasimha Rao dismantled the Nehruvian model in its entirety. And this was more curious because a congressman was actually dismantling the model of a congressperson. But that was something which is why I said that this happened as a response to something. But the next inflection point actually comes with Vajpayee. Well, we became a balancing power with Indira Gandhi. We wanted to be seen as one of the fiddle in the broader strategic calculus. That again, as you know, was a consequence of certain developments that happened. For instance, the Henry Kissinger's secret visit to China, and then that was brokered by Pakistan, so that was even more a fearful thing. And on backdrop of it, there was some major reorientation happening. During Vajpayee's time, a major innovation that happened was, if I may use that word, we realized that strategic partnerships are a component of comprehensive national power. Strategic partnerships, if you read your newspapers today, you will hear this word, strategic partner, then comprehensive strategic partner, all-encompassing strategic. So diplomats have a way of using words. But the key term is strategic partners. And what do we mean by strategic? Why we call America a strategic partner and let's say not Brazil or someone else? Strategic partner, the moment you read the term strategic partner, it means that our relationship is actually getting advanced to the level of defense and security. To what extent we advance on that, from there we can have any nomenclatures, deep-rooted, this, that and the other. But strategic partnerships was the, how strategic partnerships can be a component of comprehensive national power was explained to us during the Vajpayee's tenure. In fact, this was for the first time India starts talking about building relations with major powers on terms of parity. So if you remember, Vajpayee was the first person to call United States as a natural ally. So Vajpayee said that India and US are natural allies. Till that time, the word ally was taboo. The word ally was not used. Even if you are having an ally in Soviet Union, you will not use that word. Ally means you are just giving up your autonomy to any other country. But Vajpayee said this in the US Congress, that India and US are natural allies, which means that India and US are now relations on par. Vajpayee was talking about parity with major powers. Up until now, we were a balance. When you say you are a balancing power, you assume some level of subservience. If not subservience, you assume some level of hierarchy within it. When you are talking about natural allies, you are talking about parity with major powers. This is the language we started using for the first time. This is a language we have never. In fact, Brajesh Mishra, who was the National Security Advisor of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he said that India, US and Israel is the axis which will have the will to take over international terrorism. So we were actually ready to have like-minded groupings to take on thematic issues like terrorism also. So this again showed that we were talking with major powers with parity. This India was no more a second fiddle. This India was not going to be a subservient or accepting the hierarchies. It will talk to the major powers with parity. And this is when we from being a balancing power, now if you read the literature, then India was now becoming an emerging power. An emerging power which is ready to talk in same language with the major powers. It is happy to deal with major issues, and it's not just with the United States. We did that with Russia. We started our strategic partnership with Japan in the fag end of that administration. So we were actually talking about emerging power. So while power was important, of course, since Indira Gandhi, we have never looked back. We have never entertained ideas that power can be compromised. But what kind of power we were? We were an emerging power. And what gave us the status of emerging power? It was the nuclearization. Today is 13th of May. So almost 24 years since we tested a nuclear weapon. So from 11th of May to 13th of May in 1998, we tested a series of nuclear weapons. So today is 13th May, incidentally. That gave us the status of an emerging power. And okay, this was not just, okay, we tested a nuclear weapon, we obviously got a lot of sanction, we faced a lot of wrath. But the credit is not there. Of course, Vajpayee tested the nuclear weapons, but before him, all prime ministers' efforts were to test that. Narasimha Rao almost had readied the nuclear tests. But because of international pressure, we could not test it. In fact, Narasimha Rao said to Vajpayee that I couldn't do it, please do it. So it was obvious, every prime minister was committed to India's nuclear weapons, even Rajiv Gandhi. I mean, he may be saying disarmament at United Nations, but he was readying nuclear weapons back at home. So everyone was committed to this. So credit was not just there. The credit was what happened after India tested those weapons. And this is where, from being a nuclear power, from being a nuclear outcast, we became a responsible nuclear power. Now, this was a major development. The series of diplomatic overtures between Jaswant Singh, who was then the foreign minister, and Stuart Talbot from the United States. He had almost 16 rounds of negotiations in the matter of 1 year. And in those span, we were completely outcast, and then we were considered as a responsible nuclear power, which is in the benefit of international system. So earlier nuclear weapons were seen as a threat to international peace and security. We convinced United States and some of the Western powers that our nuclear weapons are for the good of the world. Now this is no mean diplomatic feat. In fact, the roots of nuclear deal were in these major diplomatic overtures that happened, and we were able to convince world that we are a responsible nuclear power. So that was a major point of inflection that happened. From being a balancing power, we were now an emerging power, a power which can talk in terms of parity with major powers, and a power which was also now is ready to shoulder the responsibilities of global governance. Now this was something which was again a new development. We were trying to take more interest in material terms in global governance. We were already talking about international terrorism. We were talking about shouldering nuclear issues. That was happening, which were again an indication that India was moving towards a more credible, more active role at the international scene. This policy, by the way, was, again, you will see an element of continuity. Manmohan Singh took forward this policy. In fact, the roots of nuclear deal were sown in the Vajpayee government. They were taken to its logical conclusion with the Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh government completed the nuclear deal. Manmohan Singh government also, whatever India-Japan relations that we have today, were solidified. The base of it were given in during the Manmohan Singh's time. And the next inflection point obviously comes with the present administration. So what has changed with the present administration? Now we have looked at that India was a moral power. We have looked at India became a kind of a balancing power with Mrs. Gandhi, an emerging power with Vajpayee. This present, like I said, you have n number of articles, n number of books only discussing about Modi's foreign policy. I remember there was a book published in 2015 talking about a Modi doctrine emerging. Of course, we don't want to get into hyperboles. In 1 year is just too little to show if there is a new doctrine or not. But there is some new element definitely which has come in. And what element is that? First, we are, we are no more hesitant of pursuing power, and we are no more hesitant of projecting power also. So pursuing power is one element, and projection of power is another element. And that is something, an indication of major powers. From emerging power, now we talk the language of major powers. We are no more just emerging. And what are the indications? How do I say that? First, like I said, you just look at the record of defense procurements that have happened in recent times, and you compare it with the record of procurements that happened before. And for 10 years, in fact, we did not have any procurements at all. Our defense preparedness suffered massively. In fact, A.K. Antony, who was our defense minister, he was one of the most honest persons. There were no major corruption charges against him. But very funnily, he was called as Bapu Nadkarni of cricket. He was a test bowler, and his success was that he would bowl for the entire day without taking a wicket. No, so he may not have done any corruption, but he was not there doing what he should be. We should have procured defense procurements, we should have augmented our power, we should have been able to, build our defense industry to something at least. But in last few years, that is one thing which has happened substantially. Defense procurements have been phenomenal. Defense production has been phenomenal. And to add to that, we also have now become an exporting country, an emerging defense exporter. In fact, from 2017 to 2021, there has been 6-fold rise in defense exports we have done. So we are now of course, India has talked about a net importer of defense equipments. We are nowhere near matching that. But we have now started exporting, and unless and until you export weapons, remember, we all talk about private players coming into defense production and all that, but if you are not going to give them market, if government is the only buyer, why a private enterprise would come in? And now we have opened to defense exports, and that is something, Sri Lanka is taking, Myanmar is taking, Philippines has taken BrahMos. So we are now becoming an exporter. This is an indication of a major power. We are no more just taking weapons, we are no more just talking about things, we are now becoming a major power. It's not just about parity anymore. The next indicator of a major power is a norm builder. A major power never takes the norms, or never just takes the norms. Remember, we were norm builder even during the Nehru's time. Non-alignment was a major norm that India did. But after that, just recall what were the major contributions that India had in the international scene, except about talking against the nuclear NPT and talking against the terrorism. But now we are an active norm builder. The Paris Accords, India was a major player who ensured that Paris Accords happened. When Paris Accords were down with the Trump, International Solar Alliance came in. We also started talking about maintaining international law and order. If there is one country which has normatively challenged China in the Indo-Pacific, it has been India. In all the forums, whether it is United Nations, whether it is Shangri-La Dialogue, whether it is European Forum, Indian administration has always taken on China normatively, and that has been one of the major indicator of that India is now ready to build norm. It is no more a norm taker, it is a norm builder. That is an indication of a major power. In power projection, there were surgical strikes, there were air strikes, and we called out Pakistan's nuclear, but we were always concerned about what will happen. We were always concerned about escalation to nuclear issues. But we showed that, armed response to unprovoked Pakistani aggression is possible. Now we have Rafale. Of course, when we did the airstrikes, there was Mirage 2000, so we had to go into Pakistani territory to strike. Now we have Rafales, we don't even have to cross Pakistan border. We can hit Pakistani targets from within our territory, which is why Rafale was so important. So not only power pursuing, we also are projecting power. You see the amount of mobilization happened on the Chinese border, during Doklam, during the Galwan. So it's not just a power which is emerging, it is now a power which is a major power. And therefore, and of course, in the morning we talked about how India was indispensable in all the discussions that is happening in Europe right now with regards to Russia and Ukraine. But you take any issue, it's not possible to ignore India today. Economic-wise, it's not possible. It is a pivot in the Indo-Pacific. In any equation in Indo-Pacific, in fact, the entire nomenclature of Indo-Pacific is because they wanted to include India in the consideration. Earlier, it was called Asia-Pacific, and United States also stuck to that term Asia-Pacific. Now it is called as Indo-Pacific, implying that the centrality of Indian Ocean in the considerations of entire region. This change happened because they wanted to ensure the centrality of India in the equation. And you will see that China even today uses the word Asia-Pacific because they are not interested in India becoming the central. But India, that entire norm, and it's not just the entire Western countries, starting from United States, are now using this nomenclature. United States, in fact, has named its Pacific Command as Indo-Pacific Command. So India is now central in any of the geopolitical discussions. India is central into any of these concerns, which shows that India is now a major power. It's not just an emerging power. It talks with parity. If you just look at, of course, we talk, Devankar sir talked about how Jaishankar responded to some of the discourteous responses from United States. But that is something which India as a major power is supposed to be. Just when United States was trying to arm twisters during the S-400 deals with Russians, we stood our ground. I mean, the people who, in fact, people say that during the entire Ukraine crisis, India has been neutral. It is far from reality. India has not been neutral. You read the statements which India has given. India has said that India do not approve of aggressions. India has taken a position, and it's just that India has not taken side of any country, but India has taken position. That is an indication of a major power. I mean, of course, we were elected in as a non-permanent member of Security Council, but by any means, if there is any country except China who can say that India is not a member, we'll have to reassess the strategic calculus across the globe. That is an indication of a major power, and that is the change which has happened in this recent administration. So this is broadly what was the journey of India insofar as last 7 or 8 decades is concerned. India began as a moral power, thought that hard power was not necessary, sort of emerged as a balancing power, tried to rearrange itself in the regional calculus. With nuclearization, with responsible nuclear power, we emerged as an emerging power, trying to bring about certain parity with major powers, and today India is a major power. If we are talking about multipolar world today, India is definitely a major pole within that. And if anything is to be arranged, it cannot be arranged without Indian concern in that. And it has obviously happened over years, but that is a change which has happened. I hope the direction which Indian foreign policy has taken continues, and that is broadly being the case. I mean, even if tomorrow Congress government comes in, it's unlikely that we are going to see a radical change in foreign policy. Of course, if communists come to power at center, then probably you can have a radical change. But communists coming to power at center is as likely as India getting a permanent membership at United Nations Security Council. So we don't have to factor in that now. But it will remain, that is something which is important, that we remain on the path that we have taken, and hopefully that will happen. So that's about my 2 bits about how Indian foreign policy has evolved for so many years. I'll be happy to engage after this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your very comprehensive talk on the evolving nature of foreign policy in India. And thank you, ma'am, also for the very interesting lecture on cybersecurity. I'm sure that a lot of us enjoyed it very much. I would also like to thank our principal and vice principal in absentia, Upasni sir, who is the CEO of SP College, all our professors, Vazay sir, and our HOD, Dr. Manjari Karekar ma'am. The program is over. The next session will begin soon. Everyone, please remain seated in the auditorium. The next lecture will begin soon.
आता सगळे वाघ परत पाणी असेल तर देतो का थोडं पुढे जातो लगेच.
Good evening, one and all. I, Renuka Kulkarni, welcome all the respected delegates present on the dais and every one of you seated here on behalf of Department of Political Science, Sir Parshuram Bhau College for Neetikushal 2022. Now we move on to the second session for today, that is administration. As students of humanities and political science, we all learn about it every day, and many of us aspire to join the prestigious administrative services of India. Administration is a bridge between the very core, the policy makers of the country, and the very root, that is the common people. It is indeed a job of utmost responsibility, and welfare of each and every citizen is the ultimate goal. And administration in a developing democracy like India is even more critical and dynamic. As said by Charles Montesquieu, the sublimity of administration consists in knowing the proper degree of power that should be exerted on different occasions. Today, we are fortunate and honored to have as our chief guest and speaker a person who himself is a part of administration, is young, humble, and genuine in his work and performing his responsibilities very commendably. I welcome Honorable Shri Ayush Prasad Sir, who is currently serving as the Chief Executive Officer, Pune Jilla Parishad. Now I call upon Shreya to give us a brief introduction of Honorable Shri Ayush Prasad. Over to you, Shreya.
Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to our chief guest, Honorable Shri Ayush Prasad Sir, Chief Executive Officer, Pune Jilla Parishad. Hailing from Bihar, he pursued his BTech degree from MIT Manipal and worked as an analyst TCS. Before getting into civil services, he was an intern of National Rural Livelihood Mission, Ministry of Rural Development. Later, he secured All India rank 18th in 2014 Civil Services Examination. In his first posting, Sir took charge as the Assistant Collector, Head Sub-Divisional Office and Project Officer, Integrated Tribal Development Project, Goregaon. He was then promoted as the Chief Executive Officer of Akola Jilla Parishad in 2019. He has also served as the District Collector, Pune for a short tenure. Ayush Prasad sir is the fourth generation from his family to be serving in the administration, which is a rare feat. Sir has done an commendable job during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. He implemented Dr. Ramabai Rao's scheme of health department. He started COVID care center at Vipro and Mahange and provided health services, created awareness regarding domestic violence against women, also provided necessary care to malnourished children. Not only this, he started hospital for disabled and animal. We feel privileged to have a very genuine people-oriented officer who consider grievances from his department employees through calls every second and third Saturday. All of us now will surely agree that we are extremely fortunate to have Ayush Prasad sir to guide us today. Thank you. Over to Renuka.
Thank you, Shreya. I now request Vadi sir to felicitate Shri Ayush Prasad sir. Without wasting much time, I invite Sir to share his views.
Hello, everybody. I hope you've had a very heavy lunch. And I hope you finished your afternoon nap. And I hope you'll not be caught snoring while I'm trying to say something. I hope everybody follows English. I can speak in 3 other languages, so you could tell me if you switch from English to Hindi to Marathi to Kannada. I'll switch to any language that you tell me. Anyway, coming to college to interact with students is probably the worst thing that you could take on yourself. Because having been a student myself, a student leader myself, the naughtiest person who would actually, in sessions like this, find the corner seat and try to just make fun on the person who's on the dais. And I realized that, वक्त सबका आता है, वक्त सबका जाता है. So earlier I was on your side, I used to always think, यार ये stage वाले मस्त है ना, काफी कुछ भी ज्ञान बांट के चले जाते हैं. अब उल्टे डायरेक्शन पे you feel कि अरे अब क्या ज्ञान देना है. When ma'am said, so initially when I was called to this college, I accepted the invitation without much thought. I've heard of your college, not had a chance to interact with any of you previously, unless some of you have accidentally tweeted something. I said, yeah, very good, or something like that. And so I've not had a chance to interact with you, but the more famous thing is your biryani place that you have in front of your college. But jab se, you're not recording this and not going to tweet about it. Then I'll tell you totally politically incorrect statements. The moment I said this, a lot of people immediately took out their phones. No, but yeah. But since the time your biryani got into some controversy with the police, we've stopped eating any biryani, either from SP or anywhere else. But jokes apart, coming back to a college is a great feeling. And like always, it is a very stressful feeling. Ma'am said it is Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. So we keep celebrating a lot of Mahotsav. India is an economy that runs on festivals. So if you appreciate the Indian economy of festivals, so currently we are celebrating the National Amrut Mahotsav for the country, 75 years of India's independence. We are also, as Zilla Parishad, we are celebrating 60 years of Zilla Parishad. So we are celebrating a Hirak Mahotsav. And every other day, we also get to know a few other Mahotsavs that we keep celebrating. And we celebrate everything. And if you understand why India's economy, about 64% of Indian economy is about consumerism. You consume products and goods and all of those things. Oh, sorry, this should have been. Yeah. So 64% of our Indian economy is on consumerism, and much of the consumerism happens if you're working on the business side, and many of you would realize that this golden period for consumerism starts from around September, when you have Ganpati festival, and goes on till Christmas, New Year, and Makar Sankranti. That is the golden period. So most households in India have an income during that period. Okay. So it is very important to celebrate Mahotsavs, and I'm very happy that you are celebrating this. So I'm very grateful. So when I look at Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, and especially on college that is teaching political science and discussing, thinking, breathing political science, in today's day and age in India, okay, the most important fundamental thought process in India is the origin is Pune. Now I have an argument around this. So let's say about 50 years ago, if we were to think about what is the most fundamental, which part of India contributes maximum to the national discourse, 50 years ago. So the two photographs that we saw, it was, you could say, argue between London and Kolkata, and part of it from Delhi. You would say that economic policies were inspired from Karl Marx, or Fabian socialism, and Keynesian economy that came in a little later. Then political thought was about little left liberal, left illiberal. You could look at that and place it. You would have ideas of secularism. Do you call it salad bowl secularism, or do you call it one size fits all secularism? So all of these ideas were very, very prominent back in the past. But when we look at today's India, the idea about Hind Swaraj, it's very important and very, very emotive, very, very deep, serious concept, which sometimes I feel in Pune we realize it much lesser than the think tanks do in Delhi. Having had the privilege of interacting on both sides, the idea of a concept where we talk about, a strong sense of nationalism, that again comes from, a lot of it comes from Pune. And Pune has had a history of 400 years, mixing of icon-based nationalism. When you have, say, certain icons and you associate your nationalism and your identity around those icons. This is the discourse that has existed here for several years, and you would see our revolutionaries. The land of revolution is Bengal and in this part of Maharashtra. If you look at the agriculture policy, whatever is being driven currently, the larger ideas that is defining the current India is from Pune. Few days ago, at the birthplace of Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, we are building a school for girls and transgenders, third gender, who have had who have unfortunately faced any form of gender violence. We're building that kind of a school. So the idea of building that school was, when the villagers came, they said that let's build something huge in his memory. It is his birthplace, nobody knows of it. The population is around 952 on paper, so 300 people actually stay there. Let's do something huge. There's land available. I said, take it. Let's do a concept called Jivant Smarak. So the only other place that in Maharashtra, at least, that people can think of a Jivant Smarak was when Yashwantrao Chauhan died. That time there was a lot of discussion about, let's make a massive statue, let's make a icon, like create something, name things after him. A lot of things are named after him. That idea was there. After that, Yashwantrao Chauhan Pratishthan was created with the core idea that we would build a place that would actually live his ideas and ideals and basically carry that forward. So similarly, we thought, how about creating Mahatma Jyotiba Phule's identity by setting his work, his philosophies? Because you would realize when you study a lot about many of the greats, except for, say, Mahatma Gandhi, very few actually articulated their philosophy, their thoughts. Very few actual leaders come on a platform, come up with a newspaper, come up with in current day, a Twitter. Twitter is easy, that really does not articulate much, but whatever, a blog, a video blog, or a vlog, as you may say, barring if you actually think about it and think about deeply, Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji does it, former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru ji did it, and Mahatma Gandhi did it very extensively. He wrote books about what he's thinking, why he's thinking, and trying to explain himself continuously, because he was coming up with a very different idea of thought. And if you think about it, a democratic system of functioning within political parties, an idea of standing committee, that an example of which we see in our municipal corporation. We had in fact finished about 100 years this year. The Congress Working Committee and all came up in 1921-22. We're finishing again 100 years, another month. So, and those ideas, how those bodies were structured, with a standing committee, a working working president. So you have something known as standing committee chairman in, Pune Mahanagarpalika or Pimpri Chinchwad Mahanagarpalika. We similarly have a Zilla Parishad Adhyaksh, structured on the ideals of Mahatma Gandhi. So what I was trying to say was, when we think about some of our national icons, especially when it is relevant when it comes to political science, when we think about our national icons, you would realize that many of them don't really articulate themselves as well. So how do you understand what they actually stood for? And it is usually that body of work or an analysis that is done by a third party. But if you look at Mahatma Phule, if you look at his body of work, it stood for standing up against any form of discrimination. It is about trying to create a world where there is equality by correction. And you would look at, he's setting up 3 schools in Pune, before that one, him setting up an orphanage where to prevent infanticide, so that mothers are not forced to throw their babies in the well and things like that, shelters for widows. Anybody who was socially discriminated was taken into this. Second thing is, he is the person who actually invented the word Dalit. If you also know that, and that ultimately, and if I also understand, he's from the political social side, he's the first Mahatma of our country. So trying to take those ideals and whatever he did, he was not a government funded organization, but but he was a contribution supported organization. So taking CSR funds, a residential school for girls. Now, if you look at your own class, I'm very sure 50% are women now. If you look at any batch that is getting selected anywhere, roughly 35 to 40% are women. And you would very soon see that any batch getting selected anywhere, IIT, IAS, you name it, MPSC, etc., are very soon going to be mostly dominated by women. And so now the challenge is, now if you adapt his ideals of the 18th century, because no idea, no question, no problem is set in stone. This is sometimes what we forget. When we take any philosophy, any idea, it is not set in stone. You have to place it into a newer a newer paradigm of how the world is working around. So when we try to set it, so we decided, instead of making just a school for girls who have suffered gender violence, rehabilitation around that, a residential school, and how to make it a proper school is what we basically work on. So that is the great this thing. Apart from that, talking about, so I was expected to talk about what things. So that is one skill UPSC teaches you. You can faff about anything. And the chance is 90% may in fact take it seriously. And working in administration, you will also develop this habit of talking slowly, talking very, very, like emphasizing on certain words. That even you could mistake whatever I'm saying to be, oh, this is some mind-blowing idea this person is just throwing. Ultimately, you realize that अरे ये तो बकवास ही कर रहा था when you actually hear ये तो मतलब textbook 101 पहले क्लास में था बता. So now so let's talk about let me talk about local bodies. I'm sure I thought you had a class or a session on foreign policy. Let us talk about local body and local politics. So let me try to wake up some of you now by asking you, what do you know by local bodies? What do you know by 230, 243rd and 244th articles? What do you know about 73rd and 74th Amendment? Why do you think we should have local bodies? Do you think we should even have Panchayati Raj? Why do you think we should have Panchayati Raj? मी ऐकलंय कुठेतरी. मराठीत बोलू का हिंदीत बोलू, कुठल्या भाषेत बोलू? मराठीत बोलू का? This is another form of regional nationalism. Should we have one national language, one this thing, one size fits all? Anyways, हाँ बोला ना कुठल्या भाषेत बोल. चलो भाषा राहू द्या, भाषाची पॉलिटिक्स नंतर. आता मला सांगा. So what do you understand by 73rd Amendment? मी ग्रामीण भागात काम करता हूँ तो मैं ग्रामीण भाग में, मैं ग्रामीण भाग में काम करता हूँ तो मैं ग्रामीण भाग के बारे में बोलूँगा. I work in rural areas, so I will talk about rural areas and rural local bodies. Why am I talking in 3 languages? Because we have a 3 language policy. ठीक है, चलो. हाँ बोलो भाई. What is 73rd? अरे आसपास मत देखो. अच्छा मैं बता देता हूँ. डेमोक्रेटिक डिसेंट्रलायझेशन. अच्छा, एलपीजी माहिती आहे तुम्हाला? रट्टू बुद्धी. Okay, now tell me about LPG मध्ये. When we were talking about LPG, ठीक है? Tell me about ज्यावेळी आपलं LPG पॉलिसी आलं होता, त्यावेळी जो बदल घडवली होती, changes that happened in the early 90s. We placed a lot of emphasis on the budget of 1991. Reduction of taxes, reduction of import duties. We also placed a lot of emphasis on the fact that we liberalized our industrial policy of 1991. After 40 odd years, we changed the industrial policy, which allowed de-licensed it. But we sometimes forget that 2-3 other important things happened in early 1990s. That is, formation of the rural local bodies as a national level. The national level policy, we made rural urban also, but I'll talk about rural since I represent. So we created these rural local bodies like त्रिस्तरीय पंचायत राज समिती. So जिल्हा परिषद, पंचायत समिती आणि gram panchayat. Now gram panchayats in Maharashtra came up in 1957 after there was a Balwant Rai Mehta committee. And after the Balwant Rai Mehta committee, then when Maharashtra was formed, when Yashwantrao Chauhan Sahab was Honorable Chief Minister of Maharashtra, then we had Vasantdada Naik, who was the Honorable Revenue Minister of Maharashtra. त्यांच्या अध्यक्षतेखाली एक समिती गठीत करण्यात आली होती, ज्याचा मूल उद्देश होता की 19 आपल्या जे जिल्हा परिषद पंचायत समितीसाठी आपलं काय करायचं. That committee drew extensively on the experience of Rajasthan. राजस्थान राज्य में जो चीजें हुई थी, उसका जो बलवंत राय मेहता कमेटी की जो रिपोर्ट थी, उसके आधार पे एक जिला परिषद की एक स्थापना की गई. और जिला परिषद की स्थापना के साथ साथ महाराष्ट्र में ग्राम विकास और पंचायत राज विभाग ऐसे आरडीपीआर, आपण आरडीडी म्हणतो, त्याच्या विभागाचं पूर्ण नाम आरडीपीआर आहे, रूरल डेव्हलपमेंट अँड पंचायत. आरडीपीआर विभागची स्थापना झाली, ग्राम विकास व पंचायती राज. ठीक आहे. आणि या विभाग झाल्यानंतर वी स्टार्टेड द पॅराडाइम ऑफ रूरल डेव्हलपमेंट. नाउ द पॉलिटिकल फिलॉसॉफी बिहाइंड रूरल डेव्हलपमेंट 1993 मध्ये आपली ग्राम म्हणजे we had the constitutional amendment. We had 3 lists: union list, concurrent list, and state list. A 4th list was also created, what is called the transferred list for subjects that is to be handled by rural development. Maharashtra, on the other hand, we have not done an entire transfer of subjects to rural areas. What we have done is we have bifurcated within subjects certain things. For example, agriculture. Krishi मध्ये agriculture extension is with Zilla Parishad. एग्रीकल्चर का सुपर इन्सिडेंस दॅट इज द मॉनिटरिंग की म्हणजे कुठले फल लावलाय, किती फल लावलाय, पीक कुठे आहे वगैरे वगैरे, दॅट इज विथ स्टेट गव्हर्नमेंट. एनिमल हजबेंड्री बोथ हॅव क्लिनिक्स. हेल्थ प्रायमरी हेल्थ केअर सेंटर्स आर रन बाय अस. द secondary tertiary health care centers are run by state government. Similarly, in education, primary school is with us, secondary and higher education like yours is with state government. So that kind of bifurcation has been done between rural and state government. So in Maharashtra, at least, the transference of subjects is not complete. Okay. Now, having said that, now I'll very briefly touch upon how our rural development paradigm has shifted in Maharashtra with the focus on political science and larger ideas, and how rural development has remained stuck, and the rest of Maharashtra probably rest of the sectors have gone ahead. ग्रामीण विकास मध्ये आज मी मायबाप सरकार, शहरी भागात ज्यावेळी आपण विचार करतो तो वी टॉक अबाउट टीडीआर, ट्रान्सफरेबल डेव्हलपमेंट राइट्स. So when you buy a flat, you actually pay for some of the road that is built in. Right? तुमचा जो अतिरिक्त फ्लॅट आपण बांधतो, that is financed by the cost of construction of a road somewhere else. This is TDR. Similarly, so vertical expansion आपण शहरी भागात करतो. Rural areas do not have any such vehicle. So what we ultimately do in rural areas, we ensure that rural development takes place by MyBap Sarkar through grants. So you have a grant which is 15th Finance Commission that says that some funds are devolved to the Gram Panchayat. We give some share in the stamp duty. We give some funds in form of cess. So if you have some land cess, then Gram Panchayats raise their own funds in form of property taxes, water cess, Swachhata Kar, ityadi, long list of bills. So this is how they do the. When rural development started in Maharashtra, the first aim was water conservation, agriculture, and healthcare. In the mid 2000s, the main focus went on education. And currently, if you ask me very honestly, everybody is interested in putting high mast lights and CCTV cameras. Why high mast lights and CCTV cameras? Security. How many of you feel a genuine threat to your own security right now? कितने लोगों को लगता है कि अरे मेरे को आज रात मेरे से आज शाम तक मेरे पे कोई बॉम्ब फेंक देगा या कुछ गोली मार देगा, चोरी हो जाएगी. How many of you fear कि आज शाम तक आप पे चोरी हो जाएगी? The bank wallet you're carrying कोई पॉकेट मार लेगा. There's no personal security. Primarily, it is contractor-driven administration. Contractors say कि भाई आप ये lights extra खरीद लो. And at the lower level, that is a bigger problem. So, a technocratic administration does not really work, contractor-driven administration. So now when we talk about rural development, so the focus has been shifting from time to time. In any rural development idea, there is also another interesting thing about India's rural development side is developmental policies remain the same for a very, very long time. So sanitation has remained the same for a very long time. So earlier we had rural sanitation, then we had total sanitation, then we had Gadge Baba Gram Swachhata Abhiyan, then we had Nirmal Bharat, then we had Swachh Bharat. Housing. Pehle we had Indira Awas Yojana, then we have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, now we have Shabri, Ramai, Parthi, etc. Awas Yojana. Another thing that is unique to Maharashtra is we not only have reservations in admissions of seats in jobs and educational institutions, in public bodies. You may have heard about the OBC reservation issue that is being fought in the Supreme Court between Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and some petitioners. So we also have reservation when it comes to funds and budget. This is a very unique feature to Maharashtra. We have a reservation for women for that 10% funds must be spent for women, 5% funds is reserved for handicapped persons, persons with disabilities. It's 20% fund is for SC, ST welfare, and so on and so forth, as for population, so on and so forth. So we also have a reservation for budget. So this is another important feature of public policy in rural areas. When we talk about now, what have I done in public policy in rural areas? What we do. So when now you would have heard that there is an administrator in Jilla Parishads and urban local bodies. What is the main difference that comes when there are public representatives versus administrators? As an administrator, focused on two things: larger programs that I can show off. कि भाई हमने ऐसा किया, हमने 1000 जगह ग्राम पंचायत बना दिए, हमने ऐसा बड़े रोड्स बना दिए वगैरह. But when there are public representatives, it is more of the micro items. Whenever in Panchayati Raj, you typically find that large number of people get focused on what is called felt needs. But when it comes to technocratic administration, you are more focused on doing things that you feel would push the world forward or in a way. But in a country like India, when you're making public policy, should you be focused on felt needs, which is more immediate, you would see the results and people's life become better? Or would you be focused on just doing things that is very, very visionary and maybe would take 20 years to realize? This is a conflict that constantly goes on. Another important, you may ask me what is the difference between, private sector or an NGO sector and a government sector. The NGO sector can choose its problem. Government, the problem chooses you. Okay, that is one massive difference. Second important difference is if you are working in the corporate sector, there's a very clear 2 point. If you are a division head, you would be like, I want to increase my profitability. Profit leads to more salaries. If you are the owner of the company, you would say that my valuation must be. Okay, this is a 2 point thing. But in development, when you are doing governance, it is a web graph. You know what a web graph is, right? Various axes. So all the things that you talk about, justice, fraternity, peace, republic, you've taken from the preamble. Secularism, diversity, sovereignty, diversity is not there, unity. And all of these things need to be somewhere or the other find expression when we implement. So you may push on one direction that we have to develop very, very fast. But on the other direction, social justice may be missing. Social justice may be missing. Now, when we talk about, you will be like, every political party is roughly the same. You were talking about everybody is running the same policy, same philosophy. And I will talk, I will end my speech here and then we will get into a more interactive mode. We talk about every political party being the same. But in rural development, the last and very important thing is, when, what do you do with the surplus that you create? That is policy. Surplus is the budget, the financial resources, etc. That is the big question. So, one side of the political spectrum believes in whatever surplus you create, you do redistribution. So, it could be as small as the redistribution as giving a silai machine or a cooker, rice cooker, or like 2 gram gold for buying Mangal Sutra and so on. It is a surplus distribution. The kind of messaging or the thought is, you may say it is populist, but it is also like, thanks to your contribution and the fact that you have taken lower wages, the economy has managed to create the surplus. And we are giving you that back as like a gift. And in the process, my photograph would also go to you. The other side believes that you would say that the surplus that we create, we must push it in to ensure that we create more and more surplus. We invest into infrastructure. We build more roads, we put more railway lines, we put more bigger buildings, build more colleges, so on and so forth. Now the question is the point of equality and equity I will talk about. So the question is, in social justice, you are preventing this in trying to do like this redistribution, not social justice. When you're doing redistribution, you're actually not putting in that money for productive investment, but you're ensuring everybody gets it. But when you're investing into infrastructure or something, for example, if I build a road, it's a very interesting thing. So once, I think long time back, I was in Dantewada when we were doing this. The next Naxal movement was in a head scheme. We went there and there was a road that we traveled. Met a tribal guy from the village. He was like, "अरे इतना विकास हुआ बगा, देखो कितना अच्छा काम हुआ है, रोड इतना बड़ा बन गया." बोला, "सर ये रोड तो आपके लिए बना है, आपके पास गाड़ी है, आप इस रोड पे आए और गए। अब मेरा क्या इसमें, मतलब मुझे क्या मिला इस रोड से? मेरे पास तो 4 बकरियां थी, मैं आज भी उनको लेके जाता हूँ, एक्सेप्ट रोड की वजह से मुझे 2 बार देखना पड़ता है कि भाई गाड़ी मेरे को और मेरी बकरी को नुकसान." Question is redistribution. Infrastructure has happened. Economic growth has come. Should we do redistribution? Or how much should we do redistribution? Finally, you will realize public policy is about balance. But typically what happens, it is an unstable balance. It is never possible to find the right balance. You would always go to an extreme and do correction, and then go back to that extreme and do correction. Ultimately on a spring. It is a web graph that you're trying to plot perfectly as a good circle. Web graph is perfect is a circle. You have as many axes as possible. You should ultimately end up with a wonderful circle. Everything is equal. But then you are standing on a springboard like this, and you're trying to draw a circle. The moment you move, it moves. It is almost impossible, at least manually, draw that. When you understand this complexity that is there, then you understand. Chalo, I stop here. And since it's political science, and we're in Maharashtra, I'm sure you know about Madhav Kumar. You don't know Madhav Kumar? It's a recording, I can't tell you, you'll have to check it. Thank you so much. It is very relevant to Maharashtra politics. You should find that out. It is very important to Maharashtra. Okay. The fact that I left you in thought, see, I paid a price by not getting claps. Yeah, okay. Chalo, I'll now, this is open to questions. You can ask me anything. Okay. And I'll answer everything. It is like that Instagram mein hota na? Ask me anything. Be relevant and interesting. इतना गंभीर क्या हो गया? इसमें तो कुछ नहीं मिला. And how many of you want to end up in the UPSC? How many of you want to end up in politics? Okay, there are some who want to end up in UPSC and politics. How many of you want to end up in an NGO? How many of you are just not thinking of ending up anywhere? How many of you are happy playing the guitar outside the college?
सर एक क्वेश्चन था,
हाँ।
बीइंग एज सीईओ, एक गांव का अगर विकास करना है आपको तो कितने चैलेंजेस आपको फेस करने पड़ते हैं? पालक मंत्री है या पॉलिटिशियंस है या वहाँ के लोकल ये एमएलएस है, कैसे आप उसका एक प्लान करते हैं और कैसे उसको आप एग्जीक्यूट करते हैं?
थैंक यू, वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग एंड थैंक यू फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन। क्वेश्चन पहला, मैं आपसे वापस क्वेश्चन पूछता हूँ, विकास क्या है? इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट, चलिए ठीक है, चलो पहला लेट्स टॉक अबाउट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर। बाकी विकास क्या है? चलो सोशल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, चलो हेल्थ, ठीक है। तीसरा इंप्रूविंग स्टैंडर्ड्स ऑफ लिविंग, सर्विस डिलीवरी, यू नो लाइक, और that is social infrastructure. Technology is again, you can say physical infrastructure. Technology is not an end, no, it is means to an end. End and means to an end, pata na. But technology is like a bus. और विकास म्हणजे काय? When do you say कि भाई विकास हो गया? When would you say कि we are more developed than? पता, anybody can just go on. Equity and social justice. This question is vikas for whom? You are saying vikas for all. Now the question is, now the biggest challenge is resources. Let's say we want to do all of this. It is like going to a restaurant and saying, I want to eat everything. का एक प्लेट खा, then you'll be like, अरे इतने तो पैसे नहीं मेरे पास. Let's say every item on that thing you want to order, you don't have that much. चलो let's say you become Baramati, we give you all that money, ठीक है? Now you're getting the truth. Okay, now we give you so much money, then you are now limited by the fact that how much you can eat, right? Because even if I have like say 1 lakh rupees in my wallet, but I have just one stomach to fill. Okay. Next question is absorption capacity. But what we in administrative parlance says administrative capacity. So Zilla Parishad last year executed about 19,000 at our level. नीचे के level पे उन्होंने और किया. 19,000 works, roughly spent about 1,500 or 19,000 works. So हमारे works बहुत छोटे छोटे रहते. 78 types of works. So we ended up building 443 kilometers of roads. तुम पूछोगे कहाँ, मैंने तो आज तक देखे नहीं, गूगल पे देखो दिखता है, ठीक है? We built school के classrooms, we built halls, we built bus stands. In rural area, everything apart from police stations, police station they have their own system. ठीक है? Anything you look at, you will see कि एक green का board रहेगा, पुणे जिला परिषद पुणे 2 बार लिखा है. We still don't know why we write Pune twice, but apparently it is the brand name. Okay. So anyway, so we do all of this. Okay. Question is, where we stretch beyond our administrative capacity? Yes. In doing almost 1,500 crores, 300 crores, we could not even issue the work order. To issue a work order, there's a 52 step. You tell me कि भाई ये room बनाना है. You just tell me a rough idea कि ये room मुझे ऐसा बनाना. Trying to figure out, to make an estimate, your administration would know this. To make an estimate, you would know how many lights you need, what is the lux level of the light, how many ACs you need, what is the size of the room. Should you have this brown and white combination, or should you have green and blue combination? Should chairs be red or not red? What is the thickness of the chair? Cost itna, isme baithana, nahi baithana. Everything is a 52-step process. And Zilla Parishad does 1183 types of works. 78 types of public works, 1183 types of works. Anything from before birth, when we go and give pregnant women, register them and give them about a package of various items like iron folic acid and tablets, IFA tablets, and then delivery to death and after death certificate, and also the crematorium. All of this is done by Zilla Parishad. So this is the vastness of it. biggest challenge is first resources. Second is ability to absorb that resource. You're always stuck in a thing that you have ability to absorb resources, matlab you have manpower. In college के इस हिसाब से now let's say you have about say 2 faculty members. 2 faculty members can teach how many classes? Maybe 5 subjects. You end up with 5 faculty members. They are able to teach 25 subjects. Very efficient people. They are able to teach 25 subjects. But then you have to schedule class for 30 hours every week. You know, they are able to teach 25 hours. They are supposed to teach 30 hours. So then you have the money, but you don't have the manpower also. Now let's say you have faculty that can reach 35 hours, but you only have 30 hours to learn. So you have faculty sitting with knowledge, willing to give it to you, but are you able to absorb it? So this is a very typical administrative problem. Second problem is when we talk about anything, okay, it is about where to do it. Now let's say you say road banana. Everybody is like मेरे घर के सामने road. Metro road should I give you a very city example. Metro station. Everybody is like मेरे घर के पास metro station होना चाहिए. And I say अरे that's wonderful. एक काम करते तुम्हारे घर के सामने ही metro station बना देते. नहीं घर के पास होना चाहिए सामने नहीं. ठीक है. Everybody like पास होना चाहिए. What do you mean by पास? आधा किलोमीटर. आधा किलोमीटर दूर स्टेशन बट तुम्हारे घर के ऊपर से गुजरेगा. नहीं वो भी नहीं नॉइसलेस है वो सब पेपर के लिए ठीक है बट क्वेश्चन इज एवरीबडी वांट्स द डेवलपमेंट बट नोबडी वांट्स टू पे द प्राइस ऑफ इट. ठीक है. एंड देन यू टॉक अबाउट सोशल डेवलपमेंट. यू से एवरीबडी हेल्थ इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को करना. नाउ एवरीबडी विल बी लाइक हेल्थ इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर करना. नाउ you know in the early 2000s India opened 6 colleges like yours one college every 6 minutes for roughly 10 years. You know, you had like engineering colleges everywhere, medical colleges everywhere, art colleges everywhere, X college everywhere, physiotherapy college. कुछ भी लगाओ 6 minutes you opened a college. 10 years straight. Then comes the question, quality का क्या है? Then you're like school बनाओ, चलो बना देते हैं, क्वालिटी का गाइड. फिर बोलो ना टीचर ट्रेनिंग करते हैं. देन कुछ दिन बाद होता है टीचर ट्रेनिंग बस हालत ना हो. अरे कुछ उनको पढ़ाने के लिए टाइम नहीं है. यू ओवर ट्रेनिंग देम, दे आर नॉट टीचिंग ओनली. You have all of these disputes and conflicts at stake. Trying to reconcile these disputes and conflicts is the main challenge. As an administrator, you're like the manager. But unfortunately, what happens when anybody leaves, like I said, anybody leaves space, you're like gas, you go and occupy. Serious मत हो यार. This usually people laugh. मेरा जोक नहीं समझ में आ रहा क्या हो रहा है. हाँ नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन कुछ भी क्वेश्चन. हाँ एक तो ब्लू शर्ट सर आपके पास वापस आता. ब्लू शर्ट.
Jai Hind, sir.
जय हिंद.
Sir, I want to ask that you said you met a guy which asked you that what should I do of that road, and you also said that some people like to gain surplus, and there are 2 ways to invest it, like one to redistribute in people, and one is
There
to,
are multiple ways. I'm
Okay.
saying the 2 major ways that is thought about in India.
so the second you said is to build infrastructure. So what do you feel is most important, and what did you answer to that guy? He asked you what should I do of this road?
Political science में एक चीज है. Every question does not need to be answered. ज़्यादा खुश मत हो. Don't write this in the exam. The question paper आया वहाँ पे लिखते हैं every question does not need to be answered. And then your faculty is like ये क्या बकवास है. That is it. Sometimes it is not a question, it's an opinion. Now the big question is how do you make him access that way?
That's what I
Yeah, I understand. तो मैं आपको वही बोलूँ.
how did you convince him?
नहीं, I don't need to convince him. कभी-कभी बातों से नहीं काम से दिखाना पड़ता है. ज़्यादा टाइम actually काम से दिखाना पड़ता है. बात can convince anybody for 5 minutes. But इसके आगे तो काम से दिखाना पड़ता है ना. All the boys here, at least every time you say I love you, all the girls are laughing now. So you cannot just keep telling I love you on WhatsApp messages. You also have to get them roses, flowers, rose and flowers, same thing. Gifts, chocolates, etc., etc., etc. And since we believe in equality, girls are also supposed to give us not roses and chocolates, but something else. And this is political science in action right in your college. Okay. So you should, you should, college time is the best time to do everything except for experimental drugs, do everything. And very important, and it is very important to do internships. You should do writing articles. You should express your opinion. You should form into groups. You should travel. You should study like anything. You should read off every reference book that is given. You should challenge your faculty. Sir, ऐसा क्यों है, madam ऐसा क्यों है? To the extent that they look at you and say कि यार मैं छुट्टी डाल दूँ. And unless you have that energy and through in you, will not be able to experience college. One important thing of experience college is falling in love, getting your heart broken, and then falling in love again. Unless you do all of this, and I say this very frankly, पता है, बहुत लोग बोलते हैं नहीं I'm very focused on my education right now. 5 साल 7 साल बाद शादी करोगे, उसके बाद everybody will be like, what about work-life balance? Then बोला नहीं I'm very focused on my job right now. तो my बीवी बोलेगी ठीक है, you be focused on your job, मैं तो चल रहा. So always have work-life balance, and it is very important to do everything. As far as your question was concerned, very very specifically, मैं आपको your aim is to create access. If you are creating an infrastructure in your name, so if you build a library in your name, and let's say कि आपको membership fee is 10,000, and you are on a pocket money of 2,000, you cannot access that library. The question is, how do I create access? Some benefit, either directly, which we call direct benefit transfer, पैसा दे दो. दूसरा है, you can create an access by indirectly. Try to build up the economy. He is doing an economic, uska labor productivity is, let's say, 500 rupees per day, for example. At 500 rupees per day, he is not able to have any vehicle to go to on or use that road. But if we can give him some soft finance, for example, he'll be able to access that road, earn more money, improve the standard of living of his house. Standard of living matters, na? Okay? So that helps. Next question. Orange shirt.
Sir, I have two questions. So first one will be, when we do a development in infrastructural work. For example, I have read this in a book. So if we have to build a dam, so administration have to the people there have to migrate to different places. And there in that book, I have written, I have observed that the tribal community which was living there was all dependent on bamboo, and their houses were of bamboo, their plates were of bamboo, everything, their economy ran from bamboo. And when they were transferred to different place, it was not, bamboo was not accessible to them, and their whole life got changed. So what can administration do on it to give them to mitigate their problems? And the second one is, when we see different NGOs working for, like the Amir Khan NGO, Pani Foundation worked for the drought-prone regions of Maharashtra, and they created that on the mountains, they created that barriers for water to percolate down. So can administration too, rural administration can do these works on a large level?
Okay, thank you so much for your question. It is wonderful to see a red shirt giving voice to an orange shirt. Talking about political symbolism. Anyways, on a very serious note, you guys are very serious. You should also enjoy everything you do. You should enjoy. Okay. Okay. two things you asked. Pehla thing was about recharge shafts. Second thing was about recharge shafts. How do you increase percolation of groundwater? In Maharashtra, in Pune especially, we have what is called igneous ground. So percolation rate is less than 1 centimeter per year. If you want to, and you are drawing groundwater, you should be able to ensure that the groundwater is drawn effectively, so that, you know, like when we are over using groundwater, so that water has gone down hundreds of years ago. So if you want to recharge your groundwater aquifers, and we have hundreds of them, so we should build recharge shafts. In Pune, we have 118 villages, especially in Daun, Purandar, Baramati, and some in Junnar, which has problem of groundwater because groundwater is overexploited. We have overexploited aquifers. So in those places, what we do is we build recharge shafts. Currently, we are building 303 recharge shafts this summer, in the month of May. So these 303 recharge shafts will push down groundwater. Second thing that you should do with regard to pushing down groundwater is doing what is called soak pits. So I'm sure you must be part of NSS. So as NSS ज्यावेळी तुम्ही गावात जातात त्या ठिकाणी लोकांना प्रोत्साहित करा की आपल्याला सोक पिट बांधायचे. सोक पिट यदि आपण बांधलं, जो water you are using, the grey water that you are using, that would percolate down, and that will be used for recharging ground. The first thing that you asked me about social impact evaluation. Any project that we have to undertake after the 2013 Act, the last 8-9 years, we have to do what is called an environmental impact, we have to do what is called a social impact. So the question that you are asking me comes under social impact. Pune has 12 large reservoirs which has displaced 9,000 people. Most recent and most active in news you heard about Bhamas Khed agitation. So the person facing Bhamas Khed agitation a few years ago was me. And wahan par what typically it works is, if it is an irrigation dam, what we do is we take the land from some farmers and we do what is called command area development. That is, the water is placed in dam, and using that we put canals, and canal leads to farm irrigated lands downstream. So in the command area development, so if I had, let's say about 4 acres of land, so from me 1 acre of land would be taken, given to another person, and that person would use that land to cultivate and make a livelihood. So when you talk about not having bamboo, you know, in sometimes projects of national importance, you need to, like for example, National Highway. Currently, 5 ring roads are being constructed in Pune, 3 railway lines, one to Sangli Miraj, one to this high-speed rail network, and third is this Pune Nashik. 3 railway lines, 5 national highways are being expanded. Pune, Satara, Bangalore, Pune, Hyderabad, Pune, Nagar, Aurangabad, Pune, Nashik, Pune, Mumbai, the expressway. So this land being acquired and a ring road that is being created, you know, almost 200 odd kilometer ring road. Now, all of this requires land. You require national highways. Somebody is going to lose the land. The question is, how equitably can you ensure that the land is lost by everybody? The example I was giving you, metro station. I want the metro station close to my house, but not close enough. That is the question. Again, next question. Teacher. James.
So you talked about graph. क्या प्रधानमंत्री गति शक्ति जो मास्टर प्लान है वो सेम कंसेप्ट है, और अगर है तो क्या वो जो पंक्ति पर बैठे आखिरी इंसान के लिए उपयोगी पड़ेगा?
पड़ेगा ना. देखो अल्टीमेटली पर्कुलेट होगा ना. कोई भी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट में एक्सेस ऑफ इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, लेट्स से अभी एयरपोर्ट बनेगा, हम बात करते हैं पुरंदर में एयरपोर्ट बनेगा, कुछ लोग बोलते हैं आगे पीछे यहाँ बनेगा वहां बनेगा, जहां पर भी एयरपोर्ट. इट इज नॉट ट्रू कि हर आदमी इसका यूज करेगा. हाउ डू से एयरपोर्ट का यूज हो रहा है? मैं टैक्सी वाला हूँ, मैं कभी पुणे से बाहर नहीं जाऊंगा, और इस एयरपोर्ट तक मैं पैसेंजर्स को आके ले जाऊंगा. मैं भी यूज कर रहा हूँ टेक्निकली इनडायरेक्ट एम्प्लॉयमेंट थैंक्स टू एयरपोर्ट. कुछ लोगों को उस बड़े से एयरपोर्ट में नौकरी मिलेगी, कुछ लोग कैफे चलाएंगे, कुछ लोग वहां पे सफाई कामगार बन के रहेंगे, कुछ लोग वहां पर CISF के जवान बन के रहेंगे टेस्टिंग करने के लिए, कुछ लोग एयरलाइन कंपनी में काम करेंगे, उनको फायदा होगा. कुछ लोग ट्रैवल करेंगे, कुछ लोग ट्रैवल नहीं भी करेंगे, बट उनका बॉस ट्रैवल करेगा, उससे उनको फायदा होगा. तो डायरेक्ट इनडायरेक्ट इट इज वेरी कॉम्प्लेक्स नेटवर्क बनता है. इट इज वेरी कॉम्प्लेक्स टू से आज SP कॉलेज यहाँ पे बना, इससे फायदा किसको हुआ? आपको हुआ, डायरेक्ट फायदा हुआ. आप यहाँ पे कुछ सीख के गए, उससे दुनिया भर को फायदा हुआ, राइट? तो direct indirect फायदा बहुत हो, but you have to be very conscious, especially now when I say college life में, when you run these clubs, so you have clubs. I was checking, you don't have a college union, but you have a club. You have an arts club, you have a dramatic society, you have debating society, etc. etc. वो सब रहते हैं. So when you handle finances for them, now you would have raised some sponsorship. For example, you gave me two brothers that organic something. Now, when you raise sponsorship, you have to be very careful about each penny how you've spent. And this is something that you learn in college. It is easier to spend your own money than to spend public money. Even if your clubs are not being audited, you're not paying your taxes, you're not being asked anything, no CA is coming in. We are audited 5 times. And anybody can get up and say, I don't like the way Ayush Prasad runs the villa. Okay. But that is the thing. And anybody can question everything that we do. And it is a normal thing. We are fighting almost 350 cases in courts because people are not happy with various things. But the thing is, this is something that you pick up in college, that when you're handling public money, you may join the UPSC, you may become a political leader, you may work in an NGO, anywhere you're handling public money, you have to be doubly careful. मेरे अपने experience में, when we used to do these sort of stuff, we used to raise huge amount of sponsorship. We had a surplus. People threw parties out of it. उसके बाद कितना? मुझे नहीं बुलाया party में. देखो, this money also belong to me. It's like that. So you have to be very careful when it comes to public money, and this is something that you pick up in college. And that is what I was saying. Have every experience of life. This is the nursery to learn that. Next. Yeah, the lady.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you talked about public money, so I wanted to ask you something related about that. Metros have started in Pune and in PCMC. We have a huge connectivity of public transport across Pune district. We have buses, we have trains. There is actually no need to give a third public transport here. And honestly, I would like to ask, when there's already so much options available, why is government spending so much money in cities when the rural areas require more funds? It can solve the regional discrepancy that India has.
So 2-3 ways of answering your question. When I was like a youngster like you, and when we were talking about what should we do with small farmers, and companies are coming up with this farmer producer company, there was a public consultation that takes. So I had certain ideas. I had written a paper that was published in an international journal, and I decided to go to that meeting, and I decided to argue with the minister there. The minister was trying to explain to me, no, this is like this, this is like this, this is like that. Ultimately, he got very irritated. He said, "Ki dekho, do one thing, get 272 and do whatever you want." You know the importance of 272? What is the importance of 272? Come into government and do whatever you want. Get 145 in Maharashtra and do whatever you want. If you want to build metros, band kara do. But that is how democracy works. That is number one. When a political leader with a mandate of yours and my vote comes and sits in a position of power, he also has resources at his disposal to basically decide the policies that he or she wishes to pursue. Resources are limited. Should you build the metro for the city, or should you increase the bus transport in the village? Okay. Should people in cities move around more, or should people in villages move around more? Do you require bus transport in villages, or do you also require material transport in villages? Right? When we talk about public transportation, why? Again, there's a question. Why should it only include a human being? Why not my logistics, the saman that I'm sitting with? We have an entire department called the postal department. But can we improve our logistical movement also? How do you make logistical, when we can have massive logistical networks with regard to railways and these truck terminals. What about the micro producers? Shouldn't public also sponsor or finance, subsidize? You guys subsidize tax. Anybody having property paying property tax in Pune, you guys pay the fees even if you're not having property tax. You're paying the fees. Your college is paying property tax to Pune Municipal Corporation. I think you guys subsidize PML buses. The bus ticket is subsidized by you, almost I think to an extent of 400-500 crore per year. So the big question is, how do you where do you put in your resources? So then there are various options. Metro, what are the advantages of metro? Why does city attract people? City attracts people for jobs, standard of living, and a larger. And how does the job get two things? Jobs and standard of living. Why? How does the job get created? Market access. You are able to provide a service if you're, or you are able to move your goods if you are able to go to a factory or work in a particular. City does city need transportation? Yes. If city has better transportation, more efficient transportation, a faster transportation, do you think more and more people would be able to move around a little more? Answer is yes. So should you have a metro to support that? Answer again is yes. Then we have indexes the most livable cities. So which is the most livable city in the world? Melbourne. Melbourne has metro, bus, tram, and monorail. So if you have a central business district, you should have a monorail. I think Sydney has monorail. In a central business district to connect to various buildings, offices, should have a monorail. That is one concept. Trams for local transportation within the city limits.